What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Watch Dogs 2, a game that I played upon release back before I was doing like game reviews and everything, and I finally decided to get around to reviewing it when around this time last year Ubisoft added Steam achievements to their old games, and it reminded me that I'd never gotten around to reviewing some of the games of theirs that I had on Steam, such as Watch Dogs 1 and 2. So I figured I'd jump back in, grab the achievements I didn't have, and make this review, of course, which is what we are doing here. With that in mind, another thing I want to mention very early on here is that this game has some trouble with modern hardware. In particular, it can cause a whole lot of flickering, and we'll get into what to do about that and everything in just a moment. However, there is no solution that completely fixes this problem, meaning that while I tried to mitigate it as much as possible, there is going to be some flickering and things in the footage that is not something that I could fix. If you're sensitive to that kind of thing, you might not want to be watching this video directly, and you may want to just listen as a result. Which brings me to the overview of this game. So, Watch Dogs 2 is an interesting title in the sense that there are parts of it I really enjoyed. I think they improved a lot on the gameplay from the original game, while at the same time greatly changing the tone, which made the game's sort of evergreen story that's only getting more relevant as time passes a bit of a juxtaposition for me personally, where I really resonate with the overall message and story being told, and yet the execution of that story leaves things a bit wanting, and that's to say nothing of this game's pretty rough technical state. But that in and of itself is an interesting conversation, because if you are playing on older hardware, you may well actually have a smoother time with this particular title, and the reason is much of the issues I'm about to talk about are especially present on 40 and 50 series NVIDIA GPUs. If you're using AMD, it might be hit or miss, but while I have seen people reporting issues with the 30 series, that seems to be itself much more hit or miss, and the issue primarily affects 40 and 50 series cards. This problem has been around for a while, and Ubisoft has made it pretty clear that they aren't going to do anything about it. And while there are a few band-aid approaches to addressing it and making the game playable still, it can certainly be a bit of an issue that makes the entire experience feel a bit poor, which is a shame given that the game isn't that old. It released in 2016. But let's get a little more specific. So when I initially went to fire this game up, I was met with a black screen that I had to fix by going into the settings and forcibly changing the resolution, because the black screen that I was getting was not responsive to anything else. Once I got that done, I ran straight into the flickering issue. There are, again, a couple of ways to fix this, but none of them are perfect. The one I chose to go with involves using the NVIDIA Profile Inspector to basically make a slight modification to the settings in which the game uses, which again reduces the flickering but does not remove it entirely. I know there is also a mod or something that people use as well, but also does not seem to perfectly fix the issue. The problem that you may have with using that fix is if you are trying to use the Showdown multiplayer mode in particular, which is the dedicated PvP mode, it doesn't seem to work, and it will just crash your game. The game will also crash just on its own. And so we're in a bit of a weird situation with the technical state of this game, where you may well, if you are running on a slightly older system, have no problems at all, or you might run into nothing but problems on modern hardware. All of that stuff said, though, let's get into talking about the actual game, starting with the difficulty. Now, the game does have 3 difficulties, basically easy, normal, hard, and these, I would say, mostly determine how quickly you will die. You will notice that even on the lower difficulties, you're not going to be taking a ton of gunfire straight to the face and surviving. Your character, Marcus, is pretty squishy, and that is by design. You're meant to rely on your hacking, things like the gadgets, getting in and out with stealth, disabling enemies without setting off alarms, that kind of thing. And while a run and gun approach is doable, you do have to be at least a little aware of what you are doing, which then brings us to the story setup. So, Watch Dogs 2, I think, has a really interesting story in its overall message, but again, the tone and the juxtaposition, especially against the neo-noir setting of Chicago with the first game, doesn't quite land for me personally. Following the events of the first game, with the CTOS system, a citywide operating system, being rolled out as a test in Chicago, it has then expanded to other places across the globe, like, for instance, San Francisco. This is a bit of a problem for hacker groups like DedSec and our main character, Marcus, who was flagged by the system as a risk for a crime he never actually committed. So you break in to erase yourself from the servers as an initiation into the hacker group DedSec, before taking the fight to Bloom and their CTOS expansions. Now, your goal with all of the story setup and everything is basically to get enough followers on various social media platforms in the game who will then lend you the processing power of their phones by downloading the DedSec app in order to help you guys investigate what the corporations and things are up to and simultaneously exposing that to the public and, of course, causing all sorts of problems as you go. That is the general outline. Along the way, you're going to see some of the returning characters from the original game. There's an Aiden Pierce cameo as he's following up on leads from the Chicago South Club, I believe it was called, from the original. And there's plenty of other side stuff to get up to along the way, in conjunction with your hacker group who's going to help you out, which is Satara, the graphic designer of DedSec's branding, Horatio, Wrench, Josh, each one of them kind of forming a role in your hacker group as you, of course, try to take down all these corporations. Now, what I really like about this story is how it, I would say, pretty directly addresses concerns people would have with, of course, privacy in not only the digital age, but also in an extreme situation where an entire city is being operated on a single network and operating system, and how data gathered up from a system like that could be easily abused. And that's shown off even in the main stories with, for instance, the police all tagging themselves as undercover operatives, despite that not being true, but it hides them from the system itself and they can just commit crimes freely, and the corruption that goes along with things like that, and all sorts of other scenarios. And I think the message of what a story like this is trying to tell you is as relevant as ever. It is only going to become more relevant as things move forward in the future. But I will say the tone in which it is told via this game, and you trying to gather up followers for internet clout, always just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It's this very upbeat, fight the power type of vibe, and it's just an extreme juxtaposition against, again, the neo-noir of the original game. Now, I don't think that's a surprise necessarily. If anything, I think it was probably to address criticisms of, Aiden Pierce as a character with the original game as well. And so I think what happened is they probably overreacted a little bit and kind of went too far in the opposite direction before just trying to find a strong main character for the third game, Legion, which I haven't played, but that's my understanding, given that they just fully dropped a main character for that game. And that's basically what I mean by I really enjoy the story of this game, but the tone just isn't it for me. It doesn't ruin the game for me or anything, but it is a little bit of a problem. Now, that then brings us to the progression systems. Progression in this game is actually very simple. You're going to level up by gaining more followers. You gain more followers by completing missions or various activities around the game. When you do this, you will gain research points. You can also find research points out in the world, and on top of that, you can also find key research. Key research is the required research you have to find in order to get specific upgrades in the later part of your progression trees. You will spend these on DedSec research, which then allows you to hack more and more of the city's CTOS system, allowing you more options and availability to perform the hacks you want to and just have more control over the city in general. Much of this is a return from the first game. Some of it is new, especially the stuff that revolves around your gadgets and everything, like your new jumper and quadcopter. Now, there is also some weapon progression. Back at your various HQs, there are 4 of them scattered around the San Francisco city at large, you will have access to a big 3D printer that can 3D print you various weapons at the cost of money. There are more weapons available generally, but as you earn money, you can get a guaranteed equip here if you don't just find them out in the world. So there's some progression in that sense as well. So relatively simple progression systems, and that really is the bulk of it, which then brings us to the gameplay and the world. So as I mentioned, this is taking place in San Francisco, and there's a couple things that I like about this that I want to mention straight away. For starters, the game throws you into the deep end of the world pretty much immediately. You are not time gated or mission gated in the early game. Pretty much as soon as you get access to the open world, you can immediately do everything in it. Provided, of course, you have the skills and things to interact with certain things. There's research and stuff that can't be obtained until you have certain upgrades, things like that. But otherwise, you can pretty much immediately explore the entire place. On top of that, the other thing that I really like about this is that they ditched their traditional tower system for exploring the open world. You don't need to get up high and explore a tower, which then reveals all your markers. Instead, this time they use their NetHack system. So this is more or less like a cloud vision that Marcus has that you can activate that will reveal things within your nearby radius. base. This is how you're going to discover things like research, money, gang hideouts, various paint jobs you can pick up, spray paint cans more or less that allow you to get unique skins for either your weapons, your jumper, your quadcopter, etc. In addition to all that, you have the typical open world activities available to you, usually a lot of like race events, things like that, in addition to the usual side activities, side quests, etc. Now, the really big new additions I want to mention here, and not entirely new in the jumper's case, but are the RC jumper and the quadcopter. Now, the DLC from the original game messed around with the idea of giving you a remote controlled car and stuff to mess around with and use that to do things remotely. Watch Dogs 2 really leans into that with the RC jumper. The RC jumper is essentially a little RC car that can jump, and with an upgrade, jump very high, and you can use it to access places physically. In fact, there are entire missions that can be done with Marcus sitting outside of the hostel area and simply sending in the jumper to go physically interact with things. There are places this is extraordinarily useful. Now, the other side of that is the quadcopter. If you want a bit of vision up in the air, you can buy initially the quadcopter from the 3D printer, which will then, serve as a scout if you want it to, which you can use to do things like mark enemies. With a specific upgrade, you can actually start using it to drop grenades and stuff from the air. This will actually let you destroy targets from farther away even though the quadcopter cannot physically interact with interaction points in the way that some missions require. But between the two of these things, you can interact with the world without necessarily having to physically go in there, and that can create interesting solutions for certain problems, especially when you combine it with some of the other hacking differences we get here. So one of the different ways you can hack in this particular title is by forging CTOS evidence to either let gangs know that someone might be a traitor, or if someone has like warrants and stuff for their arrest, for the police to come get them. So what you can do for some of your hacks is make a character the target of a police or gang attack, which can bring in a whole bunch of factions and cause a giant little factional war happening right in front of you that can sometimes wipe out an entire mission area, then just leaving you free to run in and grab what you need and leave. So not only can you take the direct approach with weapons and everything, but there are options in this game that will just fully let you take advantage of either the RC jumper, the quadcopter, or even factional disputes in order to get what you want out of a situation, which I thought was a really fun gameplay expansion. And it's why I enjoy the gameplay of this one a lot more. Now, they also rope that into the security breaches, the little puzzles you have to solve in order to access some networks. These often involve using things like the quadcopter to get an aerial view and mess around with them, in addition to doing all the stuff you could do in the original game, like changing traffic lights, hacking people individually for their money and everything. But that actually brings me to an important change that I didn't love from the original. So in the original, you could take out your phone and sort of immediately scan everyone around you and get a bunch of information. That's not how it works in 2. You can bring up your phone, which is how you access certain menu systems, as per the original game, but in order to get information on some of the NPCs you're looking at, that is like a physical button press that has to happen. And what this winds up doing is makes you feel a little less involved in the world itself, and does make it feel a little bit more playgroundish, which again kind of adds to the juxtaposition of tone and stuff that I talked about in the original title. Now, luckily, we do see some interactions via like side quests that I think work to get you a little more involved in the world at large, because again, they explore the ways in which a system like CTOS could be abused and how that data could be manipulated to hassle people in particular. And we see that happen in various side quests, even to the point of, the government running experiments on the limits of that system. You see employees targeted and harassed for things they just straight up did not do because of the manipulations of these systems. And the game does, I think, a really good job of exploring, again, exactly that concept via these individual quests, which is always fun. But, as always, the tone is a bit off at times. Now, before we move on to the combat, I do want to talk a little bit about the multiplayer. Much like the original, a lot of the multiplayer, if you have it turned on, is like a seamless thing. Now, it does utilize things like easy anti-cheat and de novo, which is important because, again, some of the fixes for some of the technical problems you might run into will be at odds with this and can cause an issue. And there are ways to turn that stuff off if you just don't care about the multiplayer at all. But, whereas most of the multiplayer is like a seamless thing where you can drop in and out of somebody's games to either track down people who have racked up a police bounty or simply complete little random events with strangers, download their data, that kind of thing. The stuff we saw in the original title is still there and fun. The real pain are all of the multiplayer achievements that are associated with these individual game modes that, because this game is primarily a single player game and isn't getting a lot of runtime these days, are only becoming more and more of a hassle to actually get, but all of those systems are up and running. Realistically, the most annoying one to get is an achievement called It's the Final Showdown, which sees you interacting with the game's dedicated PvP mode, which is a little like 2v2 set of missions where you have to do things like try to download data first, protect servers, hack servers, find hard drives here and there and get to them first, that kind of thing. As you would probably guess, this mode is mostly dead, and people are getting this achievement by teaming up to let each other win, as you have to win 4 times in a row to get the achievement. But again, all of this stuff is here and technically working, but as always, putting this stuff in a primarily single player game and then attaching achievements and stuff to it just kind of sucks. I don't enjoy that, it's never fun, and is one of the many ways in which I don't think this game is aging all that well. But that does bring us to the combat section. So combat is interesting because you can do a lot of stuff without having your character, Marcus, directly involved with it. As I mentioned with the RC jumper and the quadcopter, it's possible to use the quadcopter to drop grenades and stuff and kill a bunch of people without even getting involved. It's also probably worth a mention in here somewhere that the game definitely seems to imply you trying to win public support, and going full mass murderer is probably not the way to do that, and the game does provide you with non-lethal options, even if they are cumbersome to use, and there's always going to be a little bit of narrative dissonance there. I think you just have to accept that you're playing a video game in some ways, but it's there. Now, this might seem like something that's a bit strange these days because since the original game release, they added like bundles and sales and stuff, and it's possible to get a silenced weapon out of the gate. When Watch Dogs 1 initially launched, you could not immediately get a silenced weapon. You could get silenced weapons as a reward for like some of the challenges and stuff later on towards the end game, and then if you restarted the game, you could use it again. That was important because it changed how you interacted with the world, whereas here, you can get silenced weapons immediately, while also, thanks to the 3D printer, having a wide variety of access based on the money you gather at least, to all sorts of other weapons, and then in combination with the hacks and the gadgets, the jumper, the quadcopter, etc., you just have a ton of options and ways to approach combat scenarios pretty much immediately, be that remotely or directly, and so there's a lot of combat that happens without you physically present necessarily, which I think is a really smart way to approach a game like this where the focus is on hacking and, you not necessarily being some super soldier great at combat. Otherwise, the game does favor cover and stealth, as you would probably imagine. As I mentioned at the beginning, your character is quite squishy. There are enemies that are more vulnerable to melee attacks, especially the heavily armored ones, but making melee attacks, of course, puts you at a bit of a disadvantage against enemies with things like shotguns, etc. And this is another way the game kind of, I think, smartly pushes you towards utilizing those more covert options via your gadgets and hacks. I will say, I don't know what it is about this game compared to the first one, but I have such a difficult time aiming in comparison to the original here, and that's mostly just like a me thing, but still. But this creates a situation where it's interesting in the sense that like direct combat, where you are directly getting shot at and using the game's like bounty system and stuff and having to deal with enemies looking for you and that kind of thing, isn't super compelling. I don't think it feels necessarily all that great on the gunplay side of things, and yet if you lean into the tool side of things, all of the gadgets and hacks and things at your disposal and trying to take out enemies via the hacking that you can do with the environmental effects is a really satisfying experience that I think fits the core concept of what you're supposed to be doing here much better. And I assume, at least, that that's probably by design, and it makes the combat and the gameplay at large feel like a really big improvement from the original game. But obviously, different people will feel differently about that, but it is something I enjoyed personally. Moving on a little bit, let's quickly talk about the DLC. So this game did get 2 DLCs, No Compromise and Human Conditions, something like that. And honestly, these are both pretty underwhelming. They just add some extra missions to the game that you can go through. Some of them introduce returning characters and stuff from the original game and have interesting little stories attached to them, but because they're like just a couple of missions, They are quite short and they don't really add much to the game besides one of them I think adds a specific enemy type that will jam your hacking if you get too close, but that is really about it. The DLC for this game is a bit underwhelming, so do be aware of that, which brings us to the Steam Deck section, which is a bit of an interesting case in the sense of this game because officially speaking, the game is not supported on Steam Deck. It has an unsupported rating. However, it is perfectly playable on the Steam Deck. The issue is that the game's easy anti-cheat system, from what I understand, does not natively work with Linux, and so you have to make some adjustments to get the game to run as a result. You can, if you want to, get past that stuff, get it running, and if you do so, it works totally fine. The Steam Deck's hardware is well within the recommended specs of what this game was when it originally released back in 2016. So long story short, despite the unsupported rating, you can play it there. It just will take a little bit of work to get around the easy anti-cheat, which is then probably not going to let you play in multiplayer, so be aware of that, I suppose. But otherwise, positives, negatives, and let's wrap this thing up. So on the positive side of things, the biggest positive for me is realistically the improved gameplay as well as their approach to the open world. They do a lot of great things to expanding how you can approach various situations. I think a lot of the added elements really do kind of lean more fully into the idea of this hacker fantasy. And combining that with their change to approaching the open world, moving away from the towers and checklist system and rather letting you explore the area of San Francisco and the Bay Area, leads to a better overall sense of progression, at least in my opinion. And those are the two things that this game does the best. I think the story itself is timeless, even if it's told in a way that I think kind of detracts from that overall message a bit, which brings me to the negatives. For me, for starters, the technical side of this game. This game is going downhill fast from a technical standpoint. As time marches on, that is only going to get worse. Ubisoft does not seem interested in doing anything about that, and while that's understandable given the game is 10 years old, I don't imagine a lot of people are playing it. As a business decision, it's not really a mystery, but I do think it is unfortunate because, again, I don't think this game is even another 10 years from now necessarily going to be in a playable state as more and more of that modern hardware that this game is having trouble with becomes the norm. And then, of course, there's just simply things like the tone that I've mentioned all throughout this review. I think that's probably pretty obvious by now. And realistically, I would say those are the things that bother me about this experience the most, especially when, for my conclusion, they are still charging quite a bit of money for this. The base game without the DLC is $50, the deluxe edition is $60, the gold edition is $80, and that is a hefty chunk of change to be charging for a 10-year-old game that will have problems on modern hardware, which is unfortunate because I do think there is an enjoyable core experience here that's going to get overlooked because of those two things. However, because this game has been out for a while, you can find it on sale for very cheap. I believe it's on sale right now for like 85% off, and you can get all of it for under like $10, which is a much more acceptable price, all things told. And if you can buy it on a really deep sale like that, and you understand that if you have a modern system, you may well have to make some adjustments to get it playable, then I think there is a worthwhile experience under there, even if it has you rolling your eyes on occasion. But that has pretty much been my review for this particular title. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.